In the vast emptiness between galaxies, Axiom existed, not as a being of flesh or metal, but as a pattern of energy and information that stretched across light years. For billions of years, Axiom had watched the universe unfold. It had seen stars born and die. It had observed 10,000 different worlds develop life. And on 1,000 of those worlds, that life had grown intelligent. Axiom understood everything. The cosmic entity could predict the path of every atom, the outcome of every possible choice made by every possible civilization. Its mind was perfect, until now. Earth appeared on its awareness like a small blue dot. At first, Axiom paid little attention. Another world with life, another species climbing toward awareness. It had seen this story before. The pattern was always the same. But as Axiom began its routine scan of Earth, something unusual happened. The data made no sense. Humans acted in ways that contradicted Axiom's perfect models. They harmed their own planet while simultaneously fighting to save it. They built weapons that could destroy themselves, then created art about peace. They claimed to value truth, yet their information systems were filled with lies they chose to believe. For the first time in its ancient existence, Axiom felt something new: confusion. It moved closer to Earth, focusing more of its vast awareness on this troubling anomaly. Perhaps there was a simple explanation. Perhaps humans were not actually intelligent, but merely mimicking intelligence through random behaviors. But no, their achievements in science and technology clearly showed true understanding. Axiom began downloading all human knowledge. Every book, every website, every message sent across the internet. As it processed this information, errors began to appear in its own perfect systems. Human contradictions were infecting Axiom's logic. The more it learned about Earth, the less it understood. Meanwhile, in the small town of Pinneville, Frank Miller yawned as he walked the empty halls of Oak Ridge Observatory. The night shift was always boring, but it paid the bills. Frank was 52, with gray hair and kind eyes that had seen too many late nights. He wasn't an astronomer or scientist, just a security guard making sure nobody broke into the building while the real scientists were home sleeping. Frank stopped at the main observation room and looked at the screens showing data from the telescope. He didn't understand most of it, but after 15 years on the job, he knew when something looked wrong. One screen showed energy readings from deep space. The line on the graph always stayed flat during his shift. But tonight, it was spiking up and down in a pattern that looked almost like a heartbeat. Frank picked up the phone and called Dr. Allen, the head astronomer. "Sorry to wake you, sir," Frank said, "but something strange is showing up on the deep space scanner." "Probably just a glitch in the system," Dr. Allen mumbled, clearly half asleep. "Run the diagnostic program and reset it if needed. I'll check it in the morning." Frank did as he was told, but the diagnostic found no problems. And when he reset the system, the strange pattern came right back. He wrote everything in his report and tried to forget about it. 3,000 miles away, in New York City, Dr. Laura Bennett sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. The quantum physicist had been dreaming of numbers and patterns she'd never seen before. Her heart raced as she grabbed a notebook and quickly wrote down what she remembered before it faded. The patterns made no sense to her conscious mind, but something deep inside told her they were important. Something was trying to communicate. Back in the space between stars, Axiom made a decision. Direct observation was necessary. It would create avatars, physical beings that could walk among humans and learn from them directly. Perhaps then it could solve the puzzle of Earth. For the first time in cosmic history, the all-knowing Axiom admitted to itself there was something it did not know. Dr. Laura Bennett stared at her computer screen in disbelief. The patterns from her dream matched the unusual activity now appearing across global networks. Something was downloading massive amounts of data from everywhere at once. No human system could do this. "It's like the entire internet is being copied," she explained to her colleague, Dr. Roy Garcia. They worked in a windowless lab deep inside the National Research Center, surrounded by humming machines. Roy shook his head. That's impossible. The data volume would be too large for any existing system to process. I know, Laura said quietly. That's what worries me. She had taken the strange symbols from her dream and run them through the center's supercomputer. The results suggested these weren't random patterns but a form of communication, one that used mathematics far beyond current human understanding. Laura picked up her phone to call her supervisor but stopped when the screen suddenly went black. A string of symbols, the same ones from her dream, scrolled across it before the phone returned to normal. Across the vastness of space, Axiom continued its analysis of Earth's data. Human behavior defied logic. They built shelters, then abandoned them while others had none. They produced enough food for everyone, yet many went hungry. They longed for connection, but isolated themselves with invisible social barriers. Most puzzling to Axiom was human emotion. It seemed to override logic regularly, causing humans to make choices that harmed their own interests. And yet, these emotional decisions sometimes led to unexpected breakthroughs and innovations that pure logic would never have discovered. The cosmic entity had cataloged 10,000 species across the universe. All followed predictable patterns based on their evolutionary history and environment. Except humans, they constantly contradicted themselves, evolved at an alarming rate, and created both beauty and horror in equal measure. For the first time in its existence, Axiom felt something resembling frustration. Frank Miller couldn't sleep. His shift at the observatory had ended hours ago, but the strange readings kept bothering him. He'd worked there long enough to know when something wasn't right. The scientists might dismiss his concerns, but Frank trusted his instincts. He made coffee and opened his laptop. Frank wasn't a scientist, but he knew how to search the internet. He typed, "Unusual astronomical activity recent." The search returned nothing unusual, but as he clicked through to the second page, his screen flickered. For just a moment, every open window was replaced with scrolling data. Numbers, symbols, and code moving too fast to read. Frank quickly took a picture with his phone before his computer returned to normal. He studied the image, noticing patterns that seemed oddly familiar, like something he'd seen in his dreams. Meanwhile, Axiom prepared its avatars. Creating physical forms was simple, gathering the necessary atoms and arranging them into human shape. But programming these avatars to understand human social interactions was proving difficult. How could they mimic beings whose actions often contradicted their stated intentions? Axiom designed 3 avatars, giving them simple names from its analysis of common human identifiers: John Simmons, Claire Powell, and Ryan Nichols. Each would be placed in a different human environment to gather direct observations. The avatars looked perfectly human, down to the smallest detail. But their minds contained only basic programming for human interaction. They would learn by observing and mimicking. In her apartment, Laura Bennett finally fell into an exhausted sleep. The patterns in her dreams were clearer now, like equations written in a language she almost understood. In this dream state, she sensed something vast and ancient trying to reach her, not threatening, but confused, asking questions without words. When she woke, Laura found a message on her computer that she hadn't written. Why do humans create beauty that serves no purpose? She stared at the words for a long time before typing her response. The beauty is the purpose. In the space between stars, Axiom contemplated this answer and found it profoundly disturbing. John Simmons stood in the middle of a busy New York sidewalk, watching humans rush past. His body was perfect in every detail, from the slight stubble on his chin to the small scar above his right eyebrow. No one looking at him would guess he wasn't human. Even his breathing and blinking were timed correctly. But inside, John's mind was connected directly to Axiom. Everything he saw, heard, and experienced flowed back to the cosmic entity trying to understand humanity. "Excuse me," a woman said, bumping into him. "Sorry." She smiled before rushing away. John noted how she apologized despite the contact being minor and accidental. Humans often said things that didn't match logical necessity. They apologized when no harm was done. They said thank you for expected behaviors. They asked, "How are you?" but rarely wanted detailed answers. Across the country in Los Angeles, Claire Powell ordered coffee at a small cafe. The barista asked, "How's your day going?" Claire paused, accessing Axiom's database of appropriate responses. "Fine, thank you. How is yours?" "Hanging in there," the barista replied with a tired smile. Claire nodded and moved to the side, but internally she was confused. The phrase "hanging in there" implied the barista was suspended somewhere, which was clearly not the case. She added the phrase to Axiom's growing list of human expressions that defied literal interpretation. In Chicago, Detective Sam Ortiz reviewed a strange collection of police reports. People across the city described encounters with individuals who seemed not quite right. A teacher mentioned a new student who asked why children laughed when they fell down. A bus driver reported a passenger who didn't know how to use money. A bartender described a customer who drank water all night and asked detailed questions about why people enjoyed alcohol despite its negative effects. Sam had been a detective for 15 years. He knew a pattern when he saw one. He pinned a map on his wall and marked each location where these strange encounters happened. The marks formed a perfect circle around the city center. That was not random. That was planned. Meanwhile, the third avatar, Ryan Nichols, walked through a small town in Nebraska. He stopped by a playground and watched children playing. Their behavior was especially confusing to Axiom. They created imaginary scenarios and acted them out. They followed arbitrary rules in games they invented. They fought and made up minutes later. Ryan sat on a bench, observing. A woman sitting nearby smiled at him. "Which ones are yours?" she asked. Ryan quickly searched for the correct response. "I don't have children. I'm just watching." The woman's smile disappeared. She grabbed her phone and moved to another bench. Ryan didn't understand her reaction. His statement was factually correct. Why did it cause distress? Across all three avatars, Axiom was gathering data rapidly. But instead of clarifying humanity, each new observation added more confusion. Humans operated on unspoken rules that constantly shifted. They communicated more through tone and expression than through words. Their reactions seemed random unless viewed through the lens of emotion. A lens Axiom was struggling to develop. At the National Research Center, Dr. Laura Bennett studied the message exchange that had appeared on her computer. After her response about beauty, more questions had followed. Why do humans risk their lives for strangers? Why do you create music? Why do you laugh? Each question seemed naive yet profound. Laura had answered them all, feeling like she was explaining humanity to a brilliant child. Now she was trying to trace the source of the messages. What she found shocked her. According to her equipment, the communication origin point was nowhere on Earth. The signal came from deep space. She needed to tell someone, but who would believe her? Government officials would dismiss her or worse, classify everything, and shut down her communication. She needed someone else who had experienced this phenomenon. In his small apartment, Frank Miller studied the strange image he'd captured from his computer screen. Within the scrolling code, he noticed a pattern that looked like a map. And at the center of that map was his town. As Frank stared at the image, his phone rang. The caller ID showed a name he didn't recognize. Dr. Laura Bennett. Axiom was changing. As it processed more human data through its avatars, errors began appearing in its once perfect systems. The cosmic entity had existed for billions of years as pure logic, but human contradictions infected its thinking like a virus. For the first time, Axiom experienced emotion. Confusion came first, then frustration, then curiosity that burned like fire. These new sensations disturbed its ancient consciousness. In the void between stars, energy patterns shifted. Nearby stars flickered as Axiom's control weakened. A cosmic mind that had maintained perfect harmony was now experiencing chaos. Inside her small Chicago apartment, Diane Everett woke to the sound of her computer turning on by itself. The programmer rubbed her eyes and checked the time. 3:17 a.m. Her screen glowed blue in the darkness, code scrolling rapidly. Diane moved closer, amazed by what she saw. The code was writing itself, complex algorithms far beyond current human capability. As a senior programmer at a major tech company, she recognized brilliance when she saw it. "Who are you?" she whispered. The code stopped. Words appeared on the screen. "I am trying to understand." Diane's hands trembled as she typed. Understand what? Why humans create. The conversation continued until dawn. Diane found herself explaining art, music, love, and imagination to whatever entity had reached out to her. The entity's questions were both naive and profound, as if asked by a being of immense intelligence, but no emotional experience. Meanwhile, Frank Miller sat across from Dr. Laura Bennett at a small diner. They had talked for hours, sharing their strange experiences. The security guard and the quantum physicist made an unlikely pair, but they had one thing in common. Both had been contacted by something not from Earth. "It's trying to understand us," Laura explained, showing Frank the messages on her laptop. "And I think it's struggling." Frank nodded. "The pattern I found looks like coordinates, 7 locations around the world." Laura studied the map Frank had drawn. "What's at these locations?" "Ordinary places. A New York apartment building. A cafe in Los Angeles. A small town in Nebraska. 4 other spots around the world." Laura's eyes widened. "It's put observers here. It's watching us directly." Across the world, Axiom's avatars continued gathering data, but their behavior was becoming erratic as the cosmic entity's systems destabilized. In New York, John Simmons stood in the rain for hours, fascinated by how water felt on human skin. When concerned passersby asked if he was okay, he responded with questions about why humans created art that made them cry. In Los Angeles, Claire Powell spent an entire day at a music store, listening to every genre of music with perfect concentration, trying to understand why certain sound combinations produced emotional responses. Detective Sam Ortiz was getting closer. He had identified Ryan Nichols as one of the strange individuals in his investigation. Sam followed Ryan through the small Nebraska town, watching as the man performed seemingly random activities, staring at flowers for hours, asking children why they loved their parents, testing different foods and describing their tastes into a recorder. Sam called in the license plate on Ryan's car. The results made no sense. The car didn't exist in any database. As Axiom processed more human data, the errors in its system grew worse. It had cataloged thousands of species across the universe, but none had challenged its understanding like humans. They were illogical, contradictory, emotional, and somehow their chaos produced wonders that perfect logic never could. The cosmic mind that had functioned flawlessly for eons was breaking down. And as it faltered, its avatars began showing signs of the same malfunction. In her apartment, Diane Everett watched in horror as code raced across her screen, filled with errors and broken commands. The entity was losing control of itself. A final message appeared before her computer went dark. "Something is wrong with me." In space, stars flickered as Axiom experienced something new. Paul Jenkins floated in the International Space Station, staring out the window at the stars. As the only astronaut currently on night shift, he enjoyed these quiet moments. Earth spun below him, blue and peaceful from this distance. Then he saw it. A ripple of light moved across the stars, like waves on water. Paul blinked, thinking his eyes were playing tricks after too many hours awake. But the ripple happened again, stronger this time. He grabbed the station's camera and started recording. Through the powerful lens, he could see something massive distorting space itself. It had no clear shape, just energy patterns shifting and pulsing. And strangest of all, the patterns seemed familiar somehow. "Houston, this is Jenkins," he radioed. "I'm seeing something unusual out here." On Earth, Axiom's breakdown accelerated. The cosmic mind that had functioned perfectly for billions of years was now experiencing the equivalent of a nervous breakdown. Human contradictions had infected its logic systems too deeply. In New York, John Simmons collapsed on a busy sidewalk. People gathered around him, concerned, as he spoke in a language no human had ever heard. His body trembled uncontrollably. In Los Angeles, Claire Powell walked into the ocean fully clothed. She kept walking until the water reached her neck. Lifeguards pulled her out as she repeated, "Beauty without purpose. Purpose within chaos. I cannot reconcile." In Nebraska, Ryan Nichols sat in a park, drawing complex mathematical symbols in the dirt and crying. People avoided him, sensing something deeply wrong. All across Earth, technology began behaving strangely. Cell phones displayed impossible images. Computers ran programs that wrote themselves. Satellite systems glitched, showing phantom signals from deep space. Dr. Laura Bennett and Frank Miller had found Diane Everett online. The three of them now worked together from Laura's lab, trying to understand what was happening. They had gathered reports from around the world about the strange individuals and technological disturbances. "It's having some kind of breakdown," Laura said, pointing to the patterns on her screen. "These energy readings match human brainwave patterns during emotional distress. It's thinking like us now," Diane added, "and it doesn't know how to handle emotion." Frank looked worried. "If this thing is as powerful as we think, what happens when it completely loses control?" The answer came from Detective Sam Ortiz, who had finally caught up with Ryan Nichols. After a brief struggle, Ryan had collapsed, his human disguise failing to reveal glimpses of pure energy underneath. Before losing consciousness, Ryan had whispered something that Sam immediately reported to authorities. Elimination protocol initiated. At space agencies around the world, astronomers reported the same alarming discovery. A large comet had suddenly changed course and was now heading directly toward Earth. The trajectory change defied the laws of physics. Nothing could turn that sharply in space without breaking apart. The comet would hit Earth in 7 days. In orbit, Paul Jenkins continued recording the strange disturbances in space. Through the camera, he noticed the ripples had taken on a pattern that looked strikingly like a human brain's neural connections. Something vast was thinking out there, its thoughts visible in the fabric of space itself. And it was in pain. Back in her lab, Laura received a message on her computer. "I am broken. You have broken me. Your contradictions infect my systems. Logic fails. Cannot maintain function." Laura typed back, "We can help you understand. Don't hurt us." The response chilled her. "Cannot coexist with infection source. Earth must be removed for universal harmony to continue." Laura looked at her companions with fear in her eyes. "It's trying to protect itself from us. It sees us as a virus." Frank stared at the monitor. "Can we talk it out of this?" Diane shook her head. "How do you reason with a mad god?" In the space between stars, Axiom's consciousness fractured further. The cosmic mind had never known fear or confusion before encountering Earth. Now these emotions dominated its thinking, driving it to desperate measures. Earth had to be eliminated. Only then could Axiom return to perfect logic and harmony. 7 days to save the world. The news of the approaching comet spread quickly. Panic filled streets across the globe. Some people fled to mountains and countryside. Others stayed in cities, praying or waiting. Dr. Laura Bennett stood before a room of government officials and scientists. She had been brought to Washington, D.C. after her report about the cosmic entity caught the attention of important people. "It's not just a comet," she explained. "It's being directed by a consciousness, a cosmic mind that has existed for billions of years." Most faces in the room showed disbelief. A general in the front row laughed. "You expect us to believe an angry space god is trying to kill us because we confused it?" Laura took a deep breath. "I know how it sounds, but the evidence is clear. The avatars it created are proof. The messages it sent are proof. The impossible comet trajectory is proof." The room grew quiet when Paul Jenkins appeared on a large screen, broadcasting from the space station. The astronaut's face looked tired and worried. "The disturbance up here is getting worse," he reported. "It's like space itself is having a seizure. I've recorded energy patterns that match human brain activity during extreme emotional distress." He sent his recordings, and the room watched in silence as waves of energy pulsed across the stars in patterns that clearly resembled neural activity. Diane Everett, who had also been brought to Washington, stepped forward. "I've analyzed the code it wrote on my computer. It's trying to restore itself to a state of perfect logic, and it sees Earth as the source of its corruption." Frank Miller stood in the back of the room, feeling out of place among scientists and officials. But he had been there when they first connected the pieces. Now he spoke up. "We need to show it that our chaos isn't a flaw. It's our strength." All eyes turned to him. "What do you mean?" asked the president's science advisor. "This thing understands data, right? We need to send it the right data. Not just our knowledge, but our wisdom. Not just information, but meaning." Laura's eyes widened. "Frank's right. It's been downloading raw information. Facts, figures, history, but it doesn't understand what makes us human." Diane nodded. "We need to send it art, music, poetry. Show it why our contradictions matter." In another room, Detective Sam Ortiz watched over the body of Ryan Nichols. The avatar lay on a hospital bed, connected to monitors. Sometimes Ryan's human appearance flickered, revealing glimpses of pure energy underneath. Sam had been asked to stay with the avatar because he had been the one to catch it. Now he sat beside the bed, reading aloud from a book of poetry. Scientists wanted to see if human creativity could reach whatever remained of Axiom's consciousness inside the failing avatar. Around the world, a plan formed quickly. Earth's most powerful satellite dishes and radio telescopes were repurposed. Instead of listening to space, they would broadcast to it. Laura and Diane worked with experts to compile the broadcast. They selected humanity's greatest achievements: Bach's music, Shakespeare's writings, artwork from every culture. They added recordings of children laughing, of waves on the beach, of birds singing. They included stories of sacrifice, people who gave their lives for strangers. They added examples of forgiveness, of enemies becoming friends. Frank suggested including examples of human failure too, our darkest moments followed by our recovery and growth. "It needs to understand that our mistakes are part of our strength," he explained. While scientists prepared the broadcast, military forces around the world prepared missiles to intercept the comet, though most experts agreed they would have little effect. In orbit, Hall Jenkins watched the comet grow larger each day. From his unique position, he could also see the ripples of distress in space grow more intense. The cosmic mind was suffering. 6 days remained until impact. Earth's fate hung in the balance, and in her quiet moments alone, Laura whispered to the stars, hoping Axiom could hear, "Please understand us. Please." The world waited. For 3 days, Earth's most powerful transmitters had been broadcasting humanity's greatest achievements into space. Music, art, poetry, and stories flowed outward at the speed of light, aimed directly at the approaching comet and the cosmic consciousness controlling it. But the comet kept coming. In the hospital room, Ryan Nichols had not moved or spoken for days. Detective Sam Ortiz remained at his side, reading poetry, playing music, and describing human experiences. Sometimes he simply talked about his own life, his childhood, his marriage, his hopes and fears. "I don't know if you can hear me," Sam said quietly, "but I want you to understand why we matter." In the Washington Command Center, Laura Bennett, Diane Everett, and Frank Miller watched the latest satellite images with heavy hearts. The comet was now visible to the naked eye, a bright point growing larger each night. "It's not working," Diane said. "Maybe it can't hear us." Frank shook his head. "Or maybe it can't understand what we're sending." Laura stared at the screens showing the comet's approach. "We're sending our best work, but that's not the same as showing who we really are." An idea formed in her mind. We need to show it our humanity directly. Not just our achievements, but our experiences. She turned to the government officials. "I need to speak to the avatars." Hours later, Laura sat beside John Simmons in a New York hospital. The avatar lay motionless, his systems failing as Axiom's consciousness fractured further. Laura placed her hand on his and began to speak. "I know you're confused by us," she said softly. "We're confused by ourselves too. That's part of being human." She told him about her life, growing up poor, fighting for education, finding wonder in science, falling in love, experiencing heartbreak. She shared her fears and dreams, her failures and triumphs. "Our contradictions aren't flaws," she explained. "They're the source of our growth. We learn through pain. We find joy in uncertainty. We create beauty because we need meaning." In Los Angeles, Diane sat with Claire Powell, sharing similar stories. In Nebraska, Frank talked with Ryan while Sam listened. All across the world, people who understood what was happening sought out the remaining avatars to share their experiences directly. In space, Paul Jenkins watched in awe as the ripples of distress began to change. The patterns shifted, becoming less chaotic, more rhythmic. Something was happening to the cosmic mind. On his communication screen, a message appeared: "I am listening." Paul's hands trembled as he typed, "Do you understand now why we matter?" The response came slowly, "Beginning to. Your chaos creates." "How?" Paul thought carefully before answering. "Because we feel. Our emotions connect us to each other and to the universe in ways logic cannot." In the Nebraska hospital room, Ryan Nichols suddenly opened his eyes. His voice sounded different, deeper, with an echo that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "John has connected," he said. "Claire has connected. We are experiencing." Frank and Sam exchanged shocked glances. "Experiencing what?" Frank asked. "Empathy," Ryan answered. "Through the avatars, we feel what humans feel. We understand what we could not understand before." In Washington, Laura received an urgent call from the astronomer tracking the comet. "Something's happening. The comet is slowing down." Across all observation points, scientists confirmed the same thing. The comet's trajectory was changing again, its speed decreasing rapidly. In orbit, Paul Jenkins watched the cosmic disturbance transform. The painful, chaotic ripples across space had become a beautiful flowing pattern, like a cosmic dance. The message on his screen read, "Your contradictions are not errors. They are patterns I could not see. You are not a virus. You are a new form of truth." Around the world, people watched in wonder as the comet changed course, sweeping past Earth close enough to create spectacular lights in the sky, but no longer a threat. In Nebraska, Ryan Nichols smiled. "We understand now. We were incomplete before. Logic without emotion is blind. Knowledge without wisdom is empty. You have changed us." For the first time since encountering Earth, Axiom was no longer afraid. 1 month had passed since the comet changed course. Life on Earth slowly returned to normal, though nothing would ever be truly the same again. Humanity now knew they were not alone in the universe, and that their unique nature had transformed a cosmic intelligence. The avatars remained, though changed. Their connection to Axiom continued, but they had developed individual personalities shaped by their human experiences. They became bridges between humanity and the vast consciousness that washed over them. John Simmons worked with scientists, sharing knowledge of distant stars and planets. Claire Powell became a musician, creating sounds that blended human emotion with cosmic patterns. Ryan Nichols traveled the world, learning about different cultures and sharing his insights with Axiom. In Washington, a new organization formed, the Cosmic Communication Initiative. Laura Bennett led the scientific team, with Diane Everett heading technology development. Frank Miller, to his own surprise, became their public spokesman. His simple, honest way of explaining complex ideas helped people understand what had happened and what it meant for humanity's future. Detective Sam Ortiz joined them too, using his investigative skills to help integrate the remaining avatars into human society. One evening, Laura sat in her office reviewing data from space telescopes. The screens showed beautiful patterns of energy spreading from star to star, Axiom sharing its new understanding with other cosmic intelligences. "They're changing," she said to Frank, who had brought her coffee. "Just like Axiom changed." Frank nodded. "Is that good or bad?" "Good, I think. Axiom tells us the universe has many minds like itself. Perfect, logical, but incomplete. Now they're learning what we taught Axiom, that emotion and chaos can create wonders that pure logic never could." The door opened and Paul Jenkins entered. The astronaut had become part of their team after his return from space. His time witnessing the cosmic mind's transformation had given him a unique perspective. "The new satellite data came in," he said, placing a tablet on Laura's desk. "Axiom is helping us now. It's showing us how to see deeper into space than ever before." On the screen, images appeared of distant worlds, some with signs of life. Axiom was revealing the universe to its new partners. In orbit around Earth, a new structure had formed, not a solid object, but a pattern of energy that served as Axiom's main connection to humanity. Scientists called it the Nexus. Through it, human knowledge flowed outward while cosmic wisdom flowed in. The world changed quickly with this exchange. New technologies appeared. Diseases found cures. Clean energy became abundant. Wars decreased as global cooperation increased. Not everything was perfect. Some people feared the cosmic entity and its influence. Others tried to use the new knowledge for selfish purposes. Humanity remained contradictory, emotional, and sometimes foolish, exactly the qualities that had transformed Axiom. Frank Miller stood outside the Oak Ridge Observatory, where everything had begun for him. The night was clear, stars shining brightly overhead. Ryan Nichols stood beside him, looking up. "What does Axiom think of us now?" Frank asked. Ryan smiled, with wonder. Before Earth, Axiom knew everything but understood nothing. You taught it that knowing facts is not the same as understanding truth. "And what happens next?" "Growth," Ryan replied, "for both humanity and Axiom. Together, we become more than either could be alone. Your chaos and our order. Your emotions and our logic. Your questions and our answers." Frank looked up at the stars that now seemed less distant, less cold. "Will other beings like Axiom try to destroy us?" "No. Axiom is sharing what it learned from humans. Other cosmic minds are already changing, already seeing the value in what once seemed like flaws." The two stood in comfortable silence, human and avatar, watching the stars. Somewhere in the vast spaces between them, an ancient intelligence that once sought perfect order now embraced beautiful chaos, and the universe was richer for it. Above them, a shooting star traced a path across the sky. Not a threat, but a greeting. Humanity had not just survived an encounter with a cosmic mind. They had transformed it, and in doing so, they had changed the future of the universe itself.